The dusty town of Esperanza had always been ruled by men who believed women were as fragile as china teacups. Mayor Cornelius Blackwood, Sheriff Jake Morrison, and the wealthy cattle baron Samuel Thornton made all the decisions, from which crops to plant to which roads needed fixing. The women of Esperanza had grown accustomed to hearing the same refrain whenever they suggested anything. "You ladies just don't understand these matters. We can't have a town run without strong men to guide it." The three men spent their evenings at the Silver Dollar Saloon, boasting about their indispensable nature. "Why, if we weren't here," Mayor Blackwood would declare, puffing on a cigar, "this whole town would fall apart within a week." "The women folk need us to make the hard choices," Sheriff Morrison would add, tipping his hat back. "They're too gentle-hearted for the rough business of frontier life." Samuel Thornton, the wealthiest of three, would nod sagely. "It's the natural order of things. Men lead, women follow. That's how civilization works." The women of Esperanza, the shopkeepers, the schoolteachers, the farmers' wives, and the saloon girls listened to these proclamations with growing frustration. They bit their tongues when the men made foolish decisions about water rights that favored Thornton's ranch over community wells. They remained silent when the sheriff spent more time playing cards and patrolling the streets. They held their peace when the mayor allocated funds for a new statue of himself instead of fixing the schoolhouse roof. But their patience was wearing thin, like a rope stretched too tight in the desert sun. Everything changed the day Elena Vasquez rode into town. She arrived on a dusty Tuesday morning, leading a small herd of the finest horses anyone in Esperanza had ever seen. Elena sat tall in her saddle, her black hair braided down her back, wearing practical leather chaps and a wide-brimmed hat that had seen many miles. Her ranch hands, all women, followed behind her with quiet confidence. Elena had inherited a struggling ranch from her late father and transformed it into the most successful horse breeding operation in 3 territories. She was known from Santa Fe to Denver as a woman who could break the wildest Mustang, negotiate the shrewdest deal, and outshoot most men with either rifle or pistol. When she rode up to the mayor's office and dismounted, a crowd began to gather. "I'm looking to buy land," she announced to Mayor Blackwood, who had emerged to see what the commotion was about. "I hear you have some prime grazing territory for sale." The mayor's eyebrows shot up. "Well now, miss, that's men's business. Perhaps your husband should." "I don't have a husband," Elena interrupted smoothly. "I handle my own business." Samuel Thornton had appeared, drawn by the sight of Elena's magnificent horses. His greedy eyes were already calculating their worth. "Those are fine animals. But ranch work is dangerous business for a woman alone. Perhaps we could work out an arrangement where I manage your interests." Elena's laugh was like steel striking flint. "Mr. Thornton, I presume? I've heard about your management style. Half your cattle are sick, your fences are falling down, and your cowboys spend more time drunk than working. I think I'll manage just fine on my own." The crowd murmured. No one had ever spoken to Samuel Thornton that way. Sheriff Morrison stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun belt in what he thought was an intimidating gesture. "Now see here, miss. We don't appreciate outsiders coming in and stirring up trouble. Maybe you should move along." Elena studied the 3 men with calm, measuring eyes. Then she looked at the gathered crowd, at the women whose faces showed a mixture of hope and fear, at the men who seemed uncertain whether to be offended or impressed. "Gentlemen," she said finally, her voice carrying across the dusty street, "I have a proposition for you. You claim this town can't survive without men running everything," Elena continued, her voice steady and clear. "I propose we put that to the test." The 3 men exchanged glances. "What kind of test?" Mayor Blackwood asked suspiciously. "1 month," Elena said. "Give the women of this town 1 month to run things their way. If they fail, if the town falls apart, if there's chaos, if anything goes seriously wrong, I'll leave quietly and never come back. But if they succeed—" She paused, letting the implications hang in the desert air. "Then perhaps it's time to reconsider who's really indispensable around here." "Preposterous," sputtered Thornton. "Women can't possibly." "Afraid they might prove you wrong?" Elena asked with a slight smile. The challenge hung in the air like smoke from a gunfight. The men couldn't back down without looking like cowards, but accepting seemed equally dangerous. "Fine," Sheriff Morrison said finally. "But when this all goes to pieces, don't expect us to clean up the mess." What followed was the most remarkable month in Esperanza's history. The women organized themselves with quiet efficiency. Sarah Chun, who ran the general store and had been keeping the town's books in her head for years, became the acting mayor. Maria Santos, who had been secretly teaching herself law from her late husband's books, took over as sheriff. The saloon girls, led by a sharp-minded woman named Ruby, formed a council that mediated disputes with fairness and wisdom the old leadership had never shown. They fixed the schoolhouse roof in 3 days. They rerouted the water rights to ensure everyone had access to clean water, not just Thornton's cattle. They organized patrols that actually kept the peace instead of just talking about it. When a group of bandits threatened the town, the women's militia, trained by Elena herself, drove them off without firing a shot, using strategy instead of swagger. The 3 displaced men spent a month at the Silver Dollar, drinking and waiting for everything to collapse. Instead, they watched in growing amazement as the town flourished. Trade improved. Disputes were resolved quickly and fairly, and there was a sense of community that Esperanza had never known before. By the end of the month, even some of the men who had initially scoffed were admitting that things were running smoother than they ever had. On the final day, Elena called the entire town together in the main street. Mayor Blackwood, Sheriff Morrison, and Samuel Thornton stood to one side, looking sheepish and defeated. "Well, gentlemen," Elena said, addressing them directly, "it seems Esperanza has done just fine without your particular brand of leadership. The women have proven they can think, plan, organize, and lead just as well as any man, perhaps better." She turned to face the whole crowd. But this isn't about women versus men. It's about recognizing that leadership isn't determined by what's between your legs, but what's between your ears. A good community needs everyone's strengths. In the end, Esperanza became one of the most progressive towns in the territory. Sarah Chun was elected mayor in a fair vote that included both men and women. Maria Santos kept her position as sheriff, and her fair but firm approach to law enforcement became legendary throughout the region. Elena bought her land and established a ranch that became a model for the entire territory, employing both men and women based on skill rather than gender. As for the 3 former leaders, they learned to contribute in ways that actually helped the community. Mayor Blackwood became a clerk in the new city government. Sheriff Morrison found he was actually good at training horses for Elena's ranch, and Samuel Thornton was forced to improve his ranching methods or go out of business. The town's new motto, carved into a wooden sign that replaced Blackwood's statue, read simply, "Esperanza, where merit matters." And Elena Vasquez, the rancher who had defeated not just 3 men, but an entire way of thinking, became a legend throughout the Wild West. Not because she was a woman who could do a man's job, but because she was a leader who showed that the frontier was big enough for anyone with the courage to claim their place in it. The old saying, "We can't live without a man," was never heard in Esperanza again. Instead, folks would say, "We can't live without good people," which seemed to make a lot more sense under the endless western sky.